Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. California Governor Gavin Newsom is blaming President Trump for the riots in Los Angeles after a judge rejected Newsom's motion to block the Marines and National Guard from deploying.
This brazen abuse of power by a sitting president inflamed a combustible situation, putting our people, our officers, and even our National Guard at risk. California may be first, but it clearly will not end here. Other states are next. Democracy is next. Democracy is under assault before our eyes.
But the president says the federal troops are helping save the city.
Called him up to tell him, got to do a better job. He's doing a bad job, causing a lot of death and a lot of potential death. If we didn't send out the National Guard, and last time we gave him a little additional help, you would have, Los Angeles would be burning right now.
Attorney General Pam Bondi says the California governor seems to be clueless.
It's evidently Gavin Newsom has not been out to the scene. He has not turned on the television set to see the incredible amount of violence that is happening in Los Angeles. President Trump is going to make America safe again. We're going to protect Americans, and that includes Californians. If Gavin Newsom isn't going to protect them, we are.
Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass made this false statement about troop deployments.
I think that's a problem with the administration, because to come in such a massive way and to make the announcements that all of this was going to happen and then not communicate it with the local jurisdiction as to when, what, how, why is really problematic.
But the problem is that's a lie. Acting ICE Director Todd Lyons says ICE notified local authorities 48 hours in advance. This is Assistant DHS Secretary Tricia McLaughlin.
She's absolutely being dishonest. Todd Lyons is right. We had the receipts to prove it. We notified local LAPD that these ICE operations were occurring at least 48 hours in advance. And the American people should know some of the individuals that we picked up on these ICE operations. Child rapists, child molesters, murderers, convicted arsonists, truly the worst of the worst on the streets. But my message to Mayor Bass and to Governor Newsom and these rioters that they back is that ICE will not be deterred. We will not be intimidated by this rioter violence. We will keep going. We will only ramp up ICE operations, and we will continue to get these criminals off of our streets.
Immigration enforcement has arrested an illegal alien with a criminal record for throwing a Molotov cocktail at police in Los Angeles.
Homeland Security officials say Emiliano Garduno Galvez has been arrested for attempted murder after they say he threw a Molotov cocktail at police June 7th in Los Angeles. Galvez had been deported before and has a prior for grand theft in Anaheim, as well as a DUI in Long Beach. Hundreds of people have been arrested in connection with the LA riots, and at least 5 officers have been injured. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
And finally, a private university is hosting a, quote, queer flourishing event this week. More from Bronson Woodruff.
The event this week was set up by the LGBT alumni chapter at Fordham University in New York. It's a private Jesuit institution. Campus Reform reports the event has 2 professors to help guests who feel at risk or under threat due to the steps the Trump administration has taken since the beginning of this year. Part of the event's description says, quote, some LGBT plus New Yorkers are renewing their passports and checking out escape routes to other countries, fearing their marriages will be revoked or their children taken away from them or other travesties. Some have already left, end quote. Zachary Marshall, Ph.D., is editor-in-chief of Campus Reform. He said, in effect, he thinks it's sad that Fordham is supporting the notion that a person gets value from identity rather than merit or character.
Queer flourishing, I think, is a way to make everything about being queer for people who have nothing else going on. From what I understand, the idea of flourishing is connected to the human endeavor to try your hardest and be fully rounded people who are successful in life, however we measure success. I don't see how sexuality has anything to do with that.
Fordham's website describes this as a conversation that will be a, quote, proud evening of deeper dialogue and socializing. Marshall said it's concerning to him that Fordham's not teaching students how to flourish as human beings by virtue of their humanity. I'm Bronson Woodruff.
More news available online at afn.net and download the AFN mobile app for your Apple or Android device. I'm Rusty Pugh.
If we lose this cultural war, we're going to have a hedonistic, humanistic society.
Discover the story of the culture warrior Don Wildmon and how he went head-to-head with Hollywood, Playboy, the homosexual agenda, and the Disney Empire. The movement Don started paved the way for Christians to boldly stand for truth and righteousness in a hostile culture. Watch Culture Warrior today for free. Visit culturewarrior.movie.
We inform.
Religious freedom is about people of faith being able to live out their faith, live out their convictions, no matter where they are.
We equip.
Sacred honor is the courage to speak truth, to live out your free speech.
We also rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome to The Core here on American Family Radio. Glad to have you with us today on the program. Walker Wildmon here hosting the show today. AFR.net is our URL. You can check us out on the web, AFR.net. You can download the AFR app on your device, your Apple device or your Android device. You can download the AFR app. We're also on Roku as well. So a couple different areas and locations where you can find the AFR app. It's free, no gimmicks, no tricks. And while you're on the app, you can listen to this show, both live and past episodes, all archived there on the AFR app and at AFR.net. We do have the video up at stream.afa.net and on the Core's Facebook page, so you can watch the video of the program as well each and every day. Let's turn our attention to the scripture. Proverbs chapter 13 is where we are this week. Verse 1, a wise son accepts his father's discipline, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke. A wise son accepts his father's discipline, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke. You notice how the word used to describe the son shifts from a son to a scoffer. And in the latter part of verse 1, the writer here doesn't even have enough respect for the son to call him a son again. Instead, he immediately shifts the term to a scoffer when a son does not listen to his father's discipline, does not heed his father's instruction. That's Proverbs chapter 13, verse 1. Well, our Boston trip, our Boston tour in the fall is already full, and we're several months out, and we're taking 2 buses to Boston for a spiritual heritage tour in the Boston area. And but there are 2 trips that we still have seats for, and that is Israel and Greece 2026. The Greece trip is brand new. This will be our first trip over there, covering the footsteps of Paul in Greece, in Athens, Thessalonica, Corinth, and other places. We'll be trekking the footsteps of Paul. That's, we won't be literally trekking. We'll be in a motor coach, but you get the idea. It sounded good. And those trips are back-to-back in Greece and Israel. Those trips are back-to-back. So we're going to Israel first and then over to Greece. And it's going to be a great time of fellowship and exploring the places of the Bible, both in Israel and Greece. So if you want to check out those dates, that's in March 2026, wildmangroup.com. You can check out the URL, wildmangroup.com, and check out those trips to Israel and Greece in 2026. And if you missed out on Boston, well, Lord willing, there will be next year. There will be next year when you can go with us to Boston. All right, well, let's jump into some of our headlines for the day that I want to talk about. The first topic I wanted to cover, and we'll talk about this the majority of the show today, and that is the economy. President Trump was handed an absolute dumpster fire brought to you by Biden Inc. and the previous Congress. They spent more money than we had. They printed trillions, and they continued their horrible economic policies of regulation after regulation after regulation. They bashed fossil fuels, which is our primary energy supplier in America, our energy supply, and they told us how terrible capitalism is, and so on and so forth. And then the inflation that Biden brought about also added to the dumpster fire. And so that was that was what President Trump walked into. And remember, all the numbers we've been seeing in recent years with the employment numbers and the GDP numbers and all these numbers that they tried to make look positive, it was all fake. It was all fabricated. And what I mean by that was it was all artificially brought about, all right? Because the government inserted trillions of dollars in printed money at the Treasury Department into the economy. And we got quote unquote growth that wasn't true growth. It wasn't true growth because when you pull the government out of it, it all falls apart. All right. So that was the Biden scheme. Not to mention they kept revising their BLS numbers, the labor numbers, they kept revising them down literally every month for like a year. All right. They would say, oh, we added 200,000 jobs. And then the next month they would say, actually, it was only 100,000. All right. And they kept revising them down and revising them down month after month. I don't know how that's not a scandal, but apparently it wasn't a big enough scandal that they can't get their numbers right. So President Trump inherited a dumpster fire, and the deficit spending is fueling it. I've said all along, and I'll continue to say this until I'm blue in the face, I think that's the saying, that the interest rates didn't cause inflation. The rates did not cause inflation. But the Federal Reserve disagrees with me. And the Federal Reserve says they claim that the rates control inflation. The rates contribute to inflation. And that's why now they're saying, oh, we can't lower rates because inflation might spike back again. So they're insinuating and inferring that the Fed and their set rates controls inflation. Otherwise, you wouldn't say, well, we've got to keep rates high because inflation might go up again. All right. They're claiming to have the power and the authority to affect inflation. And I don't think they do. I think the 10 trillion, the 7 to 10 trillion, depending on what numbers you look at, and I know that's a big difference, 7 to 10 trillion, that was printed in the last 5 years since COVID, that is why we have inflation. When you insert $7 to $10 trillion into an economy over 5 years, you get inflation. Why? Well, this is basic economics, folks. This is not complicated stuff. You don't have to go to Harvard to figure this stuff out. The at least 7 trillion, Bessett says 10, but let's just go with 7. When you insert $7 trillion into the economy, you create demand, right? Because all of this cash, this new cash, is just flowing around the economy. And everybody's got a little extra money, right? They were mailing checks to everybody and their third cousin, even if you didn't need it. Now, tell me how that made sense. Let's mail checks to everybody, even though not everybody needs it. And we already had a unemployment safety net and a welfare safety net. Why we needed to mail checks to everybody, I have no idea. But we mailed checks to everybody. Everybody had a little extra cash. And by now, we've blown through it. Everybody's blown through their excess savings. We're back to where we were pre-COVID. But now we got a ton of debt on top of it. But the $7 trillion in excess monies that were printed is why we had inflation. All right? It caused demand for goods and services to go up and to outpace the supply side. And Economy 101 teaches that when demand for goods and services outpaces supply, businesses raise prices. Why do they raise prices? Well, because they can't keep up with the demand and they've got to slow it down. And they know people are willing to pay the price because clearly they've got the money. Otherwise, the demand would not be as hot as it is. That's inflation, all right? And some would say, well, the artificially low interest rates also contributed. Well, maybe a little bit, but I'm telling you, the $7 trillion was the problem. That was the problem. And so I give this whole spiel to say that the Fed holding rates higher than the modern historical average, I'm talking over the last 20 to 30 years, holding them higher isn't helping inflation go down. It's not. And how I know that is because of the difference between Biden and Trump numbers. And President Trump has brought about a consistent lowering of inflation expectations to now we're in the mid to low 2% on inflation. I'm talking about the averages, especially with core. And the Fed hasn't touched interest rates since December. And so I think inflation can come down, and it doesn't matter what the Fed does. I think the only reason we still have this lingering inflation to the degree that it is because Congress still hasn't figured out how to stop printing money. And so they're still pumping the economy with the trillions in deficit spending that is propping up that supply, that demand on goods and services. And part of that was the scheme of Biden to make his economy look as hot as it's ever been. But once again, it was all built on the back of deficit spending. And so this is why President Trump is correct to urge Jerome Powell to lower rates. Now, I don't think the 1% artificially low rates are healthy under any circumstance that they did during COVID. They jacked the rates down unnecessarily. They jacked the rates down to these artificially low numbers. I don't think that's good either. So I think there's an extreme end on both of these. But Powell keeping interest rates where they are today, stubbornly so, is going to cost America a lot of money because we're about to refinance America's debt. Not all of it, but a lot of it, trillions. And America's debt is up for basically refinancing, where we're going to have hundreds of billions of dollars in added interest cost, if not trillions. I'll have to look at the numbers. In added interest cost because Jerome Powell will not lower rates just a little bit. And what makes this all the more frustrating, and this is why President Trump is furious about this, is because Jerome Powell was lowering rates before Trump got in. Powell started, and of course the Board of Governors as well, the Fed started lowering rates in September. What's so special about September? Well, it's right before the election. Powell started lowering rates right before the election. And then President Trump gets in there, and all of a sudden Jerome Powell says, oh, we don't need to lower rates. We don't actually, matter of fact, we don't even know when we're going to lower rates. And so now we've gone, 6 months now of flat rates? When the Fed did 3 rate cuts in a row. They did September, they took a break in October, they did November and December. And then President Trump gets sworn in, and all of a sudden Jerome Powell changes his mind. Well, we don't need to lower rates. Well, what have you been doing the last 3 meetings? Lowering rates. And Trump sworn in. We've got trillions in debt we're about to have to refinance. And all of a sudden, the Fed has this epiphany that we need to stop lowering rates. All the while, inflation is coming down. And there's the saying out there, make it make sense. Make it make sense. And this is why people think that Jerome Powell is political. And he's not doing anything to help dispel the theory that he is political. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Blessed is the man who doesn't walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scoffers. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. One word has proven to be debilitating in our society, the D word, discrimination. What we fail to realize is discrimination is not automatically a dirty concept. We discriminate against thieves and murderers when we send them to prison. We discriminate against sexual predators by keeping them away from children. And yes, we rightly discriminate against men when we keep them out of women's restrooms. According to Psalm 1, we have to discriminate against the counsel of the wicked in order to be blessed. Good thing God isn't debilitated by the D word.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
This is Walker Wildmon with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
Walker the man Tembe lives in Mozambique, Africa. He grew up as the grandson of the village witch doctor, so he had no idea who Jesus is. But he eventually married, had 2 sons. One day those sons went missing. They put together a search party. They found out these boys had been murdered, killed at the hands of the grandfather and his world of demons and child sacrifice. This put Tembe and his wife into a severe depression. A Christian invited them to come learn about Jesus, and they have now come to place their faith in him. But the story doesn't end there. They've gone on to lead 200 people to Christ who look at these two and they see people who have the grace and gumption to move forward in life. AFR listening family, we want to bless 16,000 Bibleless believers in Africa by June 30th. You've blessed 12,000, 4,000 to go at $5 a Bible. Will you call 800-YES-WORD? That's 800-YES-WORD, 800-YES-WORD, or give it sendbiblesnow.org. Sendbiblesnow.org. And God bless you for caring.
We're going to be going back to the Holy Land in March of 2026. Hello, I'm Tim Wildmon, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. We've got trips planned to the Holy Land and also to Greece on a tour we call the Footsteps of Paul. Both of those are in March of 2026. You can do both, or you can do one or the other. You can find out all the information by going to wildmongroup.com, WILDMON group.com, and check out the itinerary, the costs, and everything. We're going to be going to the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee, the holy city of Jerusalem. We're going to Bethlehem. There's just so much to see in Israel. And then in Greece, it's tracking the footsteps of St. Paul. So again, for more information on these March 2026 tours, go to wildmongroup.com, WILDMON group.com.
At the Core podcast are available at AFR.net. Now, back to At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to the Core here on American Family Radio. Glad to have you with us on today's program on this edition of the Core. I'm Walker Wildmon. You can subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. You can subscribe. Just type in the name of the program, At the Core, and you can subscribe to the show there. Well, back into our economic talk. We've got a couple of clips here. I played a clip of Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan Chase CEO, talking about deficit spending, the problem with it, how it's just eating away at our economy and consumer spending, consumer discretionary spending, and wages, etc., and the long-term impact of that. And I failed to play a clip of the secretary, the Treasury Secretary Bessent, on responding to Dimon, because he was questioned directly about what do you say to what Jamie Dimon is warning about on the deficit over the next few years, and this was Bessent's response.
JP Morgan's Diamond also predicted a debt market crisis. Cracks in the bond market was what he said. You are considering easing some regulations, you've said, for the big banks. How do you avoid that bond market crisis he's predicting spreading and really causing concern, particularly with all of the worries about American debt right now?
So again, I've known Jamie a long time, and for his entire career, he's made predictions like this. Fortunately, none of them have come true. That's why he's a banker, a great banker. He tries to look around the corner. One of the reasons I'm sitting here talking to you today and not at home watching your show is that I was concerned about the level of debt. So the deficit this year is going to be lower than the deficit last year, and in 2 years, it will be lower again. We are going to bring the deficit down slowly. We didn't get here in 1 year. We didn't get here in 1 year, and this has been a long process. So the goal is to bring it down over the next 4 years, leave the country in great shape in 2028.
You know that the Speaker of the House estimates this is going to add $4 to $5 trillion over the next 10 years, and there's that debt limit increase.
Well, again, Margaret, that's CBO scoring.
That's the Speaker of the House.
No.
He said it last Sunday on this program.
He said that's the CBO scoring.
He said that sounds right.
Let me tell you what's not included in there, what can't be scored. So we're taking in substantial tariff income right now. So their estimates that could be another $2 trillion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That we are pushing through savings. So my estimate is that could be up to another $100 billion a year. So over the 10-year window, that could be $1 trillion. President has a prescription drug plan with the pharmaceutical companies that could substantially push down costs for prescription drugs, and that could be another $1 trillion. So there's the 4.
Yes. And that gets into mandatory spending, which is a big deal. If you can reduce mandatory spending, that's a wish list land. Because of these entitlement programs. I mean, if you can get prescription costs down, that means the government, through Medicare, is paying less for prescription drugs for those on the program. That's hundreds of billions in savings over the course of 10 years, if not $1 trillion. So that's a big deal. And what he's talking about, and he's right, is that the Congressional Budget Office, their scoring protocol is in many ways laughable. It is, and they've got their reasons for how they score things, but there's so much that they're not factoring in, and they operate under zero assumptions, and sometimes that's the problem. But they're not looking into the future and factoring in the next 4 years of presidential policies that are going to help this situation. I think Besant's right. I think the deficit will continue to come down. I think that the deficit. When I say deficit, folks, I'm not talking about the debt. Now, the two are related. I'm talking about the amount of money the government has to print. And in 2025, they're changing numbers on an Excel sheet. And I'm not exaggerating. They're changing numbers in probably a treasury database. They're adding zeros, right? And so it's not literally printing cash. But I think the deficit will continue to drop. I think the amount of money that the government needs and has to print because it doesn't have it in revenues over the next few years with President Trump, I do think it's going to go down. I think it could probably go below $1 trillion for a year. And remember, we hit a peak of $2.7 trillion in 21, and I got one word for that: COVID. Then FY22, the deficit. FY22. The deficit was $1.3 trillion. The FY23 deficit $1.7 trillion. FY24 deficit $1.8 trillion. So you see, we've been trending in the $1.5 to $2 trillion deficit range year over year since Biden was sworn in, and this year is projected to be 1.3, which is an improvement over last year. And to the Treasury Secretary's point, you add in hundreds of billions in tariff revenue, you decrease some discretionary spending, you grow the economy through AI and energy production, you could get the deficit below $1 trillion, and then you could go from there. And once again, this is going to require consistent leadership, right? So we can't afford, our country can't, these plans don't work. if you get a Hakeem Jeffries House of Representatives in 2027. I'm talking about in January. It would be 26 elections, but they're sworn in January of 27. You can't, this plan begins to have cracks when the crazy Democrats, they have a say. When they have a say, everything falls apart, or at least everything starts to have problems, okay? And this is why passing this bill, this reconciliation bill with Republican-only votes, is so very important. And as I've said, I think the savings needs to be more. I think they need to get to $200 billion annually in savings over a 10-year period. That would get you at $2 trillion in savings in reduced spending over the next 10 years. I think that's going to make a lot of your holdouts happy. I think it's going to make your Ron Johnsons and your Rand Pauls and others happy. They could probably get it to $250 and $300 billion a year in savings if they were a little more aggressive. I think that's what it's going to take. But reducing the deficit spending is a very, very big deal. And everybody you read, including Elon Musk, even JP Dimon and others, they're all focused on reducing this deficit spending, because that is the major crack in America's economy, is this bloated deficit spending. It is hurting everything else, and it is also causing inflation. All right, let's move to some other clips. Speaking of inflation, we have the May numbers that came in just this morning on CPI. I think PPI comes out tomorrow, which is the CPI is from the consumer level, and I think PPI is from the producer level. Those are the two differences there. But let's listen to this CNBC report calling the inflation report, quote, welcome news. Clip 2.
There's no way to look at these numbers and say they're not welcome news. I mean, a downside surprise to core goods is where people were looking for potentially tariff effects, and maybe except for isolated areas that Steve mentioned, you're not quite getting that. So I think it's all net benefit.
All right, there you have it. That's the brief CNBC clip, but they call it welcome news. And the reason it's welcome news is because it was below expectations. Now, once again, these inflation numbers are still not anything to get excited about, to get giddy about, right? I mean, running over 2% inflation year over year without a lot of growth is going to eat away at America's wages. This is a fundamental problem with inflation, and this is, once again, the fundamental problem with modern monetary theory and the debt model. Is when inflation begins to creep up on growth, on specifically from a middle class standpoint, wage growth, then it begins becoming what was maybe a boon ends up becoming a negative, and it ends up hurting people. This is a fundamental problem with inflation, is it eats away at America's wages, and specifically the middle class. But let's remember where we've come from, all right? Let's remember where we've come from. We came from 9 to 10% inflation under Biden to now President Trump has it at about 2.4%. That's a big deal. Now, there are still some lingering categories out there that are higher than 2.4% on average, but President Trump has been able, through his energy policy, through his deregulatory policy, to bring inflation to really a steady rate. And don't get me wrong, the White House wants to see this come down more. 2.4% long term is still not good. It's got to get below 2%. But considering the circumstances and considering the massive amounts of money that our government has put into the economy in recent years, President Trump's doing a pretty good job with the 2.4% number. And remember, Jerome Powell, he's the one that said 2%. He came up with this 2% goal, and we're at 2.4. And so is Powell going to wait until we're at 1.9 to lower rates? I think President Trump can actually get it below 2. I think he can. I think it's going to take a little bit longer, and government's going to have to stop printing so much money. But I think Trump can get it below 2%. I think he will probably get it below 2% in the next 12 months. And that's going to really put Jerome Powell in a bind, because President Trump will play the clip on repeat of Jerome Powell saying, Basically, we will lower rates, or we will consider our job accomplished when we get inflation at 2% or below 2%. That'll be interesting to watch. The last thing I want to play here, the last clip on the economy I want to play is, remember just not long ago, a month or two ago, we had the Liberation Day in April and the whole tariff debate, and a lot of the economists were losing their mind on the tariffs, and this is apocalyptic, and we're going to have a Great Depression, and your iPhone's going to triple in cost. You're going to have to pay $4,000 for an iPhone because of these tariffs on China. I mean, it was just 24/7. They were beating the drum of apocalyptic economic scenario that the world will never be the same. I mean, it was just on and on and on. And their fear-mongering just hasn't bore out. I mean, it just has not come to fruition. And this is a businessman, a business owner here, talking about, this Louis Navalier, talking about the inflation boogeyman that hasn't materialized. Clip 3.
Lower energy prices have been a godsend, and that's why consumer inflation's at more than a 4-year low. We'll get PPI tomorrow. That's at a 5-year low. That's been severely deflationary in the last 2 months. And hopefully the Fed will start following the data instead of inventing this inflation bogeyman that hasn't materialized.
So the inflation boogeyman that hasn't materialized, that's so very good. Now this month, the economist that predicted the doom, now their talking point is, well, wait till next month, right? Wait till the companies, wait till they exhaust their inventory and they have to import new inventory, and then that's going to show up on the inflation report, they say. And it may not. I don't think it will, but we'll see. But right now, as of today, the inflation fear-mongering as a result of the tariffs has not come to fruition. It just has not. And as a matter of fact, month over month, inflation actually dropped. Well, it actually went up by 0.1, but relatively flat. No drastic increase in inflation month over month with the tariff, many of these tariffs already in place. Then, this is on top of today, President Trump announcing a trade deal with China, which is kind of big news. And shame on me for not mentioning that. But President Trump's team has reached a trade deal with China that will be formally signed by Xi and Trump in the coming weeks. And China is the big deal here. This is the big trade deal that all of the economists were worried about. What's going to happen with China? Well, you get a trade deal with China done, then that settles this whole debate about what's going to happen with China, all this so-called uncertainty with the markets. And this is where I just don't understand how these people on television, how they make it to the place where they're anchoring and doing interviews for national multi-billion-dollar news corporations, and they get things so wrong. This is why people are tuning out the legacy media outlets, is because they're so wrong so often. And it's one thing to have like an Twitter economist that gets it wrong because they don't know what they're talking about, or they're just trying to get clicks. But when you have all of these economists going on and all these market analysts going on your CNBCs of the world and talking about these tariffs as if they're going to be in place forever, there's never going to be a trade deal, we're going to have 145% tariff on all Chinese goods forever, there will be no relief, there will be no trade deal. And then they're playing out this doom and gloom scenario that they've got to know is not going to come to pass. Did they not think that Trump wanted a deal with China and that he was going to get a deal with China? Like, they had to have known that. That President Trump is the deal maker. He's going to get a deal with China. We're not going to sustain 150% tariffs on China goods for any significant time frame. They had to have known this is how it was going to play out. We'll be back in a few.
At Wesley Biblical Seminary, we believe God is raising up a movement across our nation and around the world who hold fast to the inerrancy of Scripture and the hope of holiness. We do this through bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees, certificate programs, and even training for lay people. So whatever your next step is in being equipped for ministry, we're here for you. And if you believe these are the kind of pastors we need leading churches in the future, we invite you to think about giving to Wesley Biblical Seminary. Learn more about us at wbs.edu.
Thoughts of the child you were carrying keep pouring over in your mind. A deep, unrelenting sadness overshadows your days, and you wonder if you will ever feel whole again. There is hope and healing from a reproductive loss. Call the International Helpline, 866-482-LIFE, and talk with someone who has been where you are. Your call is confidential, and we will help you find healing. 866-482-LIFE.
Let's see, if something costs less, a lot less, but people are actually happier with it, that sounds like something to look into, and that's MediShare. Maybe you've heard joining MediShare can save you or your family up to $500 a month, and that's huge, but it's also true. People are just happier with it. They love being part of something that reflects and promotes their values and what they believe in. MediShare works, too. It's been around for 30 years now, and members have shared more than $7 billion of each other's bills. People love having telehealth and a huge nationwide PPO network, so yeah, really, you can save a ton and like it better. Imagine being happy with how you're taking care of your health care, whether you're self-employed or part of the gig economy, or you just want a plan that you're happy with. Here you go. You can call right now and get a price within 2 minutes. A very, very smart use of 2 minutes. Here's the number you need. It's 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE. 833-44-BIBLE.
You may have noticed it's become hard to trust the media. Casual observers know it. News hounds have noticed it. Even members of the media are talking about it.
I'm very worried about the press, extremely worried about the press.
Seasoned mainstream media pro Leslie Stahl says legacy media credibility is down because of people like Elon Musk and President Trump.
If the President of the United States is going to say legacy media is dead, well, I guess Musk said that. Legacy media is dead.
What she doesn't get is that the media's lack of credibility has followed years of biased reporting. On the other hand, you can trust American Family News. AFN presents the facts in an unbiased way so you can draw your own conclusions. American Family News also provides news of interest to Christians, which you won't hear from the mainstream. At the top of the hour or at afn.net, you can trust American Family News.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio with your host, Walker Wildmon.
Welcome back to The Core. Glad to have you with us on this last segment of today's program. Putting a bow on this economic talk and the tariff talk and the interest rate talk and everything else talk. The primary reason I believe we will not see a significant increase in the inflation numbers over the next few months as a result of the tariffs is primarily for this reason. And I've talked about this before. The major players, the major companies, the major corporations, i.e. your Walmarts of the world, they knew this was coming. They knew this was coming. They've been planning for this since November of 2024. To think that your Walmarts of the world, for lack of a better term, do not have economist and import-export tariff experts that plan for these type situations, to think that they don't have the foresight and the wisdom to plan for a Trump tariff debate is to be woefully naive about the capacity for these companies to predict into the future. They even said it as much. You can find clips of major retail CEOs talking about how they front-loaded inventory before Trump was even sworn in. They front-loaded inventory from China before President Trump was sworn into office. For that reason, they basically prepared for the tariff debate, for the tariff war. And by doing so, that enabled them to pause exports from your China during the tariff window when the U.S. and China and the U.S. and others are arguing about what the tariff rate's going to be and what the terms of trade are going to be. That enabled your major retailers to pause exports during that window and rely on existing backlogged inventory. And then when your trade deals are struck or your compromises are made, then they pick back up their exports. And they avoid your drastic 150%, even though 150% really isn't that drastic when you look at some of the historical uses of tariffs. But that's how your major corporations can be insulated from the tariff debate, is by front-loading inventory. And that's what many of these companies did. And you can find clips of their CEOs talking about, hey, we front-loaded inventory because we saw this coming. We knew this was going to happen. Front-loaded inventory, and then we paused exports and avoided the tariff rate during the debate. Now, there's going to be some exceptions out there of companies that didn't plan, but your major players, they plan for this. And that's why I don't think inflation is going to be hit that much, if at all, because of some of these brief tariffs that were in place for 15, 20, 30 days. All right, let's change subjects. Let's go to Los Angeles. This has been an utter fiasco going on in Los Angeles. Let's remember how we got here, all right? Because here we are a week removed from the beginning of these riots and the beginning of the vandalism and the assaulting federal officers. And it's many people forget, how on earth did this come about, right? Did this just organically occur? How this happened is because Immigration and Customs Enforcement, under the direction of Tom Homan, under the direction of President Trump, they were doing their jobs in Los Angeles and removing dangerous, illegal alien criminals off the streets. And when they were conducting these raids in Los Angeles late last week, rioters and looters and protesters showed up at the federal buildings, specifically the ICE facilities, within Los Angeles. And it quickly began to spiral out of control. And when the federal government requested the aid of the LAPD, guess how long it took the Los Angeles Police Department to show up? 2 hours. So we went from dozens to hundreds to over 1,000 protesters and rioters at the federal building in Los Angeles over the course of 2 hours because the LAPD was so incompetent that they couldn't show up. This idea that the Los Angeles Police Department can't show up to an emergency call by federal law enforcement for aid for 2 hours is scandalous. Who told the LAPD to withhold aid and assistance from the Department of Homeland Security and ICE for 2 hours? This is like our domestic Benghazi, if you remember that fiasco under Obama, where we held back going in to rescue our ambassador and other special operatives. Hillary Clinton was a part of the scandal. This is our domestic Benghazi. And so because the LAPD refused to show up over a 2-hour window, this whole thing escalated and got out of control. Because you have incompetent leadership at the city level and at the state level with the mayor and the governor. And you had Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents that were being assaulted, attempted murder, damage to property, impeding on law enforcement activities, all happening in Los Angeles. That's why President Trump had to send in assistance. And when I look at this, I fall on two sides of the fence, depending on what day of the week it is. And then I'll tell you what side I've landed on today. When I initially saw what was going on in Los Angeles and how President Trump was sending in reinforcements, I thought to myself, is this President Trump's mess to clean up? Is Los Angeles President Trump's mess to clean up? And the reality is it's not. This is a Democrat stronghold, has been for decades. They have run the city into the ground. It is the land of the haves and the have-nots. And illegal immigrants, in this instance, are running the city. Well, how do I know that? Because they've arrested over 300 of them as part of the riots. And so if I'm looking at this from a practical, political responsibility vantage point, and I'm thinking, if I'm Trump, I just take my hands off. We'll pull out of Los Angeles, and the gangbangers and the rapists and the murderers of MS-13 and others, they can run your city. And if you guys want to do anything about it, you guys can pick your leaders. Y'all can change your leadership. You can go a different direction. But I didn't create the mess, thus I'm not coming in to fix it. All right, that's my cynical, pragmatic side. But then I'll look at it and go, this is an injustice. This is an injustice because not all Los Angeles citizens voted for this. All right, that's the first thing. Not everybody signed up for this chaos. Secondly, we've got noble, virtuous law enforcement federal officials that are trying to do their job and protect the homeland, and they're being accosted, assaulted, attempted murder, can't do their jobs, Molotov cocktails being thrown at them, people jumping on their vehicles, and that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable because if you don't do anything about that, then the anarchy wins. And President Trump is obstructed from fulfilling his constitutional mandate to protect the homeland from enemies, both foreign and domestic. Does that sound familiar? And this really has little to do with the campaign promise. And I understand the talking points of the White House and the talking points of others about how President Trump is just following through on his campaign promise. But this is way more important than a campaign promise. This is about the fundamental ability of the executive branch to command and control our federal immigration. And if ICE backs out, if CBP backs out, if the FBI backs out of LA because they've got a bunch of corrupt leadership, then they win. The corrupt leadership wins. The criminals win. The gangs win. The cartels win. And that's not good for anybody. That's not good for anyone. And so that's this dilemma that I'm going through. But I think President Trump is right in sending in reinforcements, whether it's Marine battalions or whether it's, Marine elements, whether it's the National Guard, whether it's more FBI, whatever it is, I think President Trump has to use the strong arm here because we've seen this play out before. With the 2020 Summer of Love that wasn't a summer of love, George Floyd, burn it all down riots, where President Trump took a more passive approach, tried to let the governors fix the issues, and they didn't. And cities burned as a result. And when you look at the polling on this, President Trump's approval numbers keep going up. This is what's absolutely wild, and it contradicts the media narrative, because you would think President Trump sending in the National Guard, President Trump sending in Marine units, President Trump sending in more federal officials, federal resources is going to look too strong. It's going to look overplayed, bad optics, and all of this that the media tells you that like he's a dictator and we don't need the military in our streets, and they give all these kind of talking points about how this is going to be so bad for President Trump, and meanwhile his numbers keep going up. His numbers keep going up. And I also predicted, after they lost the election in November, that they didn't have the ability to rein themselves in. They did not have the ability to rein themselves in, and this is Exhibit A. Gavin Newsom is defending the rioters and the looters. Gavin Newsom refused to send in the National Guard when President Trump talked to him. The LAPD refused to show up for 2 hours to help ICE. And then there's information now about how when the LAPD did show up, they were woefully unprepared. Let's listen to this clip. This is Aaron Cohen, he's former Israeli special ops, talking about the dangerous tactical failure of the Los Angeles mayor and leadership that happened that led to this fiasco. Clip 4.
So, Sean, where do I start with this? I've been texting back and forth with law enforcement on the ground for the last couple of days. Sean, I've been a reserve law enforcement officer for 17 years. And the leadership failure put these officers in risk, and that's the personal problem I have here. There was no unified command structure. Bass was micromanaging field decisions from City Hall, which breaks protocol. You had incident commanders, Sean, waiting on political clearance before moving teams, and that kind of interference delays reactions and gets cops killed. And in that dynamic crowd, seconds matter. Then you had curfews that were called too late, and by the time LASD and LAPD were authorized to clear the streets, the agitators had already taken control of the crowd. And they use these peaceful protesters as human shields while they're going back and forth, pelting these guys, launching fireworks, rocks. And officers walked into an environment, an ambush that was already where the threat had already built. And by the time the momentum had started, they were getting overtaken. Then the rules of engagement were politically restricted. No crowd dispersal tools, no forward posture.
Yep.
Officers had to take hits before they were even allowed to push back. You can't send cops into a volatile crowd with shields and batons and no ability to control the tempo. Tactical failure, extremely dangerous.
Well, this is the Democrats' January 6th. As a matter of fact, it's worse. It's worse because there was actual violence here. There was actual assaulting law enforcement. And when you listen to the rioters, let's listen to this clip before we wrap it up. This is about a 30-second clip. And there's some bleeps here because there was some profanity that we had to cover up. But this is a rioter admitting that their goal is to, quote, burn it all down. Let's listen.
I got to ask, what's the point of doing that at this point? Like, what's the point of tagging? I'm just asking. No, I wanted to know because, Old Vera Street, your thoughts on...
Get them the out of our city. If they don't stop, we're going to continue. We'll burn it all down.
I know, but vandalism, what does it do?
We burn it all down. You don't understand, stupid?
No, I'm not trying to be stupid. Well, how come they're destroying the Mexican properties? The Mexican
property, bro.
Across the way at Old Vera Street.
I didn't do that. This is their property.
Well, you should tell people to stop destroying.
I never touched a small business ever.
Okay.
Never. Only government property. Thank you, sir.
Well, there you have it. I think the FBI needs to investigate that clip. Why? Because this individual said, I haven't touched private property. I've only touched, quote, federal property. Oh, really? Please tell us about this. Please tell us about which federal property you've, quote unquote, touched. That's a task for the FBI. We'll see you next time.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.